Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, dogmen, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. Chapter 8. Into the Bighorns. The trail climbed steadily into the mountains, the landscape shifting from rolling plains to steep inclines and thick forests. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the wind through the pines was both soothing and ominous. The crew moved cautiously, knowing that every turn of the trail could hide danger. Jack rode at the front, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain. "Keep the herd tight," he called back to the others, "and stay close to the trail. These slopes are treacherous enough without losing cattle to a fall." The first few days in the mountains were uneventful, but the sense of being watched never left them. The forests were alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, but every so often there was something else, a low, guttural growl, a heavy thud of footsteps. Will glanced over his shoulder more than once, his rifle always within reach. "It's out there," he whispered to Hank one evening as they tended the fire. "I can feel it." Hank nodded, his face pale in the firelight. "We all can." On the fourth morning in the mountains, the men awoke to find one of the steers missing. The makeshift corral was intact, with no sign of a break, but the steer was gone. Mateo found the tracks first, leading away from the herd and into the dense forest. They were the same massive, clawed prints they'd seen before. "It took one right out from under us," Mateo said, his voice tight with anger and fear. Jack crouched by the tracks, his face grim. "It's testing us again, seeing how close it can get." Jed shifted nervously. "This thing isn't just a predator, it's smart, smarter than it ought to be." Jack stood, his expression hard. "We stay together. No one goes anywhere alone. If it wants a fight, it'll get one." That night, the men camped in a narrow valley, surrounded by towering pines. The firelight barely penetrated the darkness, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The howls started again, echoing through the trees and sending shivers down the spines of even the bravest cowboys. This time they were closer, more insistent. The cattle stirred restlessly, their lowing growing louder with each howl. "Load up," Jack ordered, his voice firm but low. The men obeyed, their rifles and pistols ready. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the edge of the camp. A tree toppled as if by some immense force. The men jumped to their feet, their weapons trained on the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Will whispered, his voice trembling. The answer came in the form of a deep, guttural growl, so close it seemed to reverberate through the ground. A shadow moved just beyond the firelight, massive and hulking, with eyes that glowed faintly red. Jack raised his rifle, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "Show yourself, damn it!" The creature didn't respond, but the growl deepened, a sound that seemed to carry both a warning and a challenge. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone, melting back into the forest. The first rays of dawn brought no relief. The camp, nestled in the narrow valley, was eerily silent save for the occasional snort from the cattle. Jack stirred from his bedroll, his back aching from another restless night. As he stood and stretched, he noticed something was off. One of the horses was loose, its reins dragging in the dirt. "Jed," Jack called, his voice low but urgent. "Where's Will?" Jed sat up, rubbing his eyes. He scanned the camp, his expression shifting from groggy to alarmed. "He was on watch last night." The rest of the crew quickly roused, their voices overlapping with concern. Mateo checked Will's bedroll. It was untouched, and his rifle was gone. "He wouldn't just wander off," Mateo said, his voice tight. "Not after what we've seen." Jack's stomach twisted as he glanced at the edge of the camp, where the ground was soft from the night's drizzle. There, clear in the mud, were two sets of tracks. One human, leading toward the forest, and another, massive and clawed, following close behind. "We're not leaving him out there," Jack said firmly, buckling his gun belt. Mateo nodded. "We'll take the horses and split up, cover as much ground as we can before the trail gets cold." Jed frowned, his hand resting on his revolver. "What if it's too late?" Jack's eyes hardened. "We don't stop until we know." The men divided into pairs, following the tracks into the dense forest. The trees loomed tall and close, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the morning light. The ground was littered with fallen leaves and broken twigs, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of the wind. Mateo and Hank were the first to find something, a patch of ground where the leaves were disturbed, as if by a struggle. Nearby, Will's rifle lay discarded, its barrel streaked with mud. "He put up a fight," Hank said quietly, picking up the weapon. "But against what?" Mateo replied, his voice barely a whisper. Jack and Jed arrived moments later, their expressions grim as they took in the scene. Jack knelt by the ground, running his fingers over a jagged gouge in the earth. "It dragged him," he said, pointing to a set of claw marks that led deeper into the forest. Jed swallowed hard. "If it wanted him dead, it would have finished him here. Why take him?" No one answered. The question hung in the air like a dark cloud as they followed the trail. As the sun climbed higher, the forest seemed to grow darker, the trees pressing in closer with every step. The trail wound through narrow ravines and over rocky outcroppings, always leading upward. Then, a howl split the air. It was long, guttural, and impossibly close. The horses spooked, their ears flattening and their eyes rolling with fear. Mateo struggled to keep his mount steady, his voice trembling. "It's toying with us." Jack raised a hand, signaling for silence. The men froze, their breaths shallow as they listened. The howl came again, this time from another direction, as if the creature were circling them. "Stay sharp," Jack muttered, gripping his rifle tightly. "And don't split up." The trail ended in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines. In the center of the clearing was what remained of a makeshift campsite. A fire pit smoldered faintly, its embers still warm. Scattered around were bits of Will's belongings, his hat, his canteen, and a torn scrap of his shirt. Mateo picked up the shirt, his face pale. He was here, not long ago. Then Jed spotted something near the edge of the clearing, a tree trunk, splintered and clawed. Etched into the bark, as if by massive fingers, was a crude mark, a symbol, or perhaps a warning. "What the hell is that?" Jed asked, his voice barely audible. Jack stared at the mark, his jaw clenched. "It's a message," he said quietly. "It wants us to know it's watching, and it's not done." The men returned to camp as the sun dipped below the horizon, their hope fading with the light. Will was still missing, and the sense of dread had deepened into something almost unbearable. That night, the howls came again, louder and more insistent. The creature didn't stay hidden this time. Shadowy glimpses of its massive form appeared at the edges of the firelight, its glowing eyes reflecting the flames. The cattle panicked, pressing against the makeshift corral and nearly breaking free. The men stood their ground, their rifles trained on the darkness, but none dared to fire. "Jack," Mateo whispered, his voice shaking. "If we stay here, none of us are getting out alive." Jack nodded slowly, his face grim. "At first light we move. We're getting these cattle and ourselves out of this cursed place." As the creature's growls echoed through the night, the men knew that the Bighorn Mountains held more than just rugged trails and wild beauty. Something ancient and malevolent hunted those who dared to trespass, and it wasn't going to let them go without a fight. Chapter 1. The Search for Will. The first light of dawn found the men somber and determined. Jack gathered the group near the smoldering remnants of the campfire, his voice low but steady. "We're not leaving Will behind," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "We've faced rustlers, storms, and stampedes. This is no different. We stick together, and we bring him back." The men nodded, though fear flickered in their eyes. Armed with rifles, ropes, and torches, they retraced the clawed tracks leading from the clearing where Will had been dragged away. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath, the towering pines casting long shadows over the damp ground. The tracks led them deeper into the mountains, winding through narrow ravines and over jagged rocks. The creature's movements were deliberate, as if it knew the terrain intimately. The claw marks on the trees and gouges in the earth grew more erratic, suggesting a struggle. "He fought back," Mateo said, pointing to a patch of churned-up dirt and broken branches. "But it was too strong." Jed said, "If he's alive, why hasn't it killed him?" Jack didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the trail, his jaw tight. He wasn't ready to consider the worst, not yet. By mid-morning, the trail crested a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. The air was colder here, the trees thicker, their gnarled roots twisting over mossy rocks. As the men paused to catch their breath, a faint sound reached them, a voice. "Help! Someone! Please!" Jack's heart leapt. "That's Will," he hissed, motioning for the others to stay quiet. They followed the voice, pushing through dense underbrush until they came upon a small cave nestled at the base of a cliff. Inside, the faint flicker of movement caught their eye. "Will!" Jack called softly, stepping forward with his rifle raised. A groan came from within, weak but unmistakably human. "Jack, over here." The men rushed inside, their torches lighting up the cave's dark recesses. Will was there, slumped against the wall, his shirt torn and his face pale. Blood matted his hair and claw marks raked his arms, but he was alive. Jack dropped to his knees beside him. "You're safe now, Will. We've got you." Will's eyes darted to the cave entrance. It's still out there," he whispered. "It dragged me here like I was nothing. I thought it was going to kill me, but it just watched, like it was deciding what to do." "Why let you go?" Jed asked. His voice hushed. Will shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe it wanted me to warn you. Maybe it's playing with us." As they helped Will to his feet, a deafening roar echoed from the cave entrance. The ground seemed to shake as the massive silhouette of the creature appeared, its glowing red eyes glaring at them. "Move," Jack barked, firing a shot that ricocheted off the cave walls. The men scrambled, dragging Will between them as the creature charged. Its hulking form blocked the entrance, forcing them to retreat deeper into the cave. "It's got us cornered," Mateo shouted, raising his rifle. "Light the torches," Jack ordered. "It hates fire." The men thrust their torches forward, the flames casting flickering light over the creature's grotesque features. Long, matted fur, massive claws, and a face that was almost human but distorted with rage. The creature roared again, but it hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing against the bright flames. Taking advantage of its hesitation, Jack fired a well-aimed shot at the ground near its feet, sending sparks flying. "Go! Now!" he yelled. The men charged past the creature, their torches held high. It swiped at them, its claws grazing Mateo's arm, but they didn't stop. Once outside, they ran, half dragging Will down the rocky slope. Behind them, the creature let out a final, earth-shaking roar before retreating into the cave. "Keep moving," Jack urged, his heart pounding as they plunged back into the forest. By the time they reached camp, the sun was high, casting warm light over the valley. The men collapsed by the fire, their breaths ragged. Will sat propped against a log, his face still pale, but his expression determined. "We have to get out of these mountains," he said. "That thing's not done with us." Jack nodded. "We'll move at first light. But tonight, we keep the fire high, and no one goes anywhere alone." The men agreed, their fear tempered by relief. They had rescued Will, but the knowledge of the creature's intelligence and strength weighed heavily on them. Chapter N. The Sudden Attack. The cattle shifted uneasily in their corral, lowing nervously at every snap of a twig. The men stayed close to the fire, their rifles within arm's reach, and their eyes scanning the forest. Jack stood watch, his shoulders tense. The others tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. They all knew the creature was out there, biding its time. A low growl shattered the silence, coming from the darkness just beyond the firelight. Jack raised his rifle, his voice sharp. "It's here." The growl grew louder, closer, and then chaos. The creature charged into the camp, its massive form illuminated by the fire. It moved with terrifying speed, scattering the cattle and crashing through their makeshift barriers. "Hold your ground," Jack shouted, firing a shot. The bullet hit the creature in the shoulder, but it barely flinched. The men scrambled, grabbing their weapons and forming a loose circle around the fire. The creature swiped at the nearest wagon, smashing it to splinters and sending supplies flying. Mateo lit a torch, swinging it toward the creature. The flames made it pause, its glowing eyes narrowing in rage. "Drive it back!" Jack yelled, grabbing another torch and thrusting it forward. The creature let out a deafening roar, shaking the ground beneath their feet. It lashed out, knocking Jed off his feet and sending his rifle skidding into the dirt. "Jed!" Mateo lunged forward, grabbing his friend by the arm and dragging him back. The creature advanced, its movements almost calculated. It wasn't just attacking, it was testing them, pushing them toward the edge of the clearing where the firelight dimmed. "Stay together," Jack barked, stepping in front of the others. He fired another shot, this time grazing the creature's leg. It let out a guttural snarl, retreating slightly, but still circling them like a predator sizing up its prey. Jack realized they couldn't keep retreating. The creature wasn't going to stop until they were all dead, or it was. "We end this now," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "Mateo, grab the dynamite from the supply wagon. We'll set a trap." Mateo nodded, dashing toward the wrecked wagon. The creature lunged after him, but Hank and Jed fired in unison, their bullets striking its chest and momentarily stunning it. Mateo returned with the dynamite, his hands shaking as he handed it to Jack. "What's the plan?" Jack quickly tied the sticks together, attaching a short fuse. "We lure it in close, then light this and throw it. When it goes off, it's not getting back up." The men spread out, using the fire to keep the creature at bay as Jack readied the dynamite. The creature's growls filled the night, its red eyes flickering with a primal fury. "Over here!" Jack shouted, waving a torch to get its attention. The creature charged, its massive form crashing through the camp. Jack lit the fuse, his heart pounding as the sparks hissed and crackled. "Now!" he yelled, tossing the dynamite toward the creature. Time seemed to slow as the dynamite hit the ground near the creature's feet. For a moment, it hesitated, sniffing at the strange object. Then, boom! The explosion rocked the clearing, the fireball lighting up the night. The creature let out a blood-curdling roar, its massive form thrown back by the force. When the smoke cleared, the men cautiously approached the smoldering crater where the creature had fallen. Its body lay still, its fur singed and matted with blood. The glowing red eyes were finally dim, its monstrous form lifeless. Jack exhaled, lowering his rifle. "It's over." The men stood in stunned silence, their faces pale and their breaths ragged. Jed knelt beside the creature, his hands trembling. "What the hell was this thing?" Mateo shook his head. "Something that doesn't belong in this world." As dawn broke, the men packed up what little they could salvage and prepared to leave the mountains. The cattle, miraculously, had mostly survived the attack, though they were skittish and difficult to manage. Jack looked back at the clearing one last time, the charred ground and shattered trees, a stark reminder of their ordeal. "Let's move," he said. "The sooner we're out of these mountains, the better." The trail ahead was long and uncertain, but they carried with them a hard-earned lesson. Some things in the wild were more than just legend. and some battles left scars that would never fully heal. As they drove the herd down the mountain, none of them spoke of the creature again, but they all knew its memory would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.